Welcome to People Keeping It Sacred, our new program highlighting people keeping it sacred in the world. I'm Rabbi Heather Miller, founder of Keeping It Sacred, and I'm so excited to introduce you to today's guest, Dr. Melina Abdullah. Dr. Melina Abdullah is a professor of Pan-African Studies at Cal State LA, co-founder of Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, co-director of Black Lives Matter Grassroots, and mama of 3 amazing children. Dr. Abdullah earned her PhD from USC in political science and her BA from Howard University in African American Studies. Dr. Abdullah has authored numerous scholarly articles and book chapters, is the creator, host, and producer of the radio program Move the Crowd, and co-host and producer of Beautiful Struggle, both on 90.7 FM KPFK radio. She's a recognized expert on race, gender, class, and social movements. And Dr. Abdullah and I met at a press conference for interfaith leaders at Holman United Methodist Church in 2015, standing together to denounce the actions of some hoping to start a race war by shooting members at churches, at Black churches. Since then, we have stood together in various contexts, including against the tremendous forces of white supremacy-fueled hatred. Together, we're building the world we wish to see, and together we're keeping it sacred. It's such an honor to have you here on the show. Welcome, Dr. Abdullah.
Thank you, Heather. And it feels weird to hear you calling me Dr. Abdullah because we are friends and hang out, and you're Heather and I'm Melina.
But when I think of you, Melina, like I think of this sacred resistance, right? This, not only because we went to Washington, D.C. together after having organized that International Day of Sacred Resistance, which was honored in 33 cities globally, but also because the Black Lives Matter movement itself is a sacred resistance. And you have called it a spiritual movement. I was wondering if you could share with our audience what makes it a spiritual movement.
Sure. Well, Black Lives Matter, built, it's often conceived of as a movement for racial and social justice, and it is. But when we talk about the liberation of Black people, every struggle for liberation of Black people has been grounded primarily in spirit and spiritual work. The work of Black Lives Matter, usually the first thing that we do when someone is killed by police is go out into the community and pray and pour libation and gather with the family and gather with community. And that's spiritual work. That's spiritual work. So remembering that we're grounded in spiritual work, right? When we got rid of Jackie Lacey, we often say in front of the Hall of Injustice, we don't know how we're going to topple this whole system that's behind her. We don't know how that's going to happen. Mm-hmm. But we're going to stand here and we're going to chant down Babylon, right? And we are going to make sure that our energy is here and move in a righteous way. And, almost 3.5 years later, Jackie Lacey was voted out of office, and that was spiritual seeds that were planted. And so we remember that when we say that we are struggling for Black liberation, for Black freedom, for the end of state-sanctioned violence against Black people, that it's not just about voting, it's not just about protesting, it's about using every tool in our toolbox. And for Black people especially, spiritual tools are hugely important in how we've been victorious in every struggle for freedom, throughout the centuries and generations.
It's that faith, keeping the faith and keeping the hope and the seeds of hope. And
absolutely.
And that can be achieved in community. And I'm wondering, I'm thinking about all of the signs that the progress is being made, right? All of the groups that are coming, they're coalescing around the movement. I think about like medical professionals for Black lives, teachers for Black lives, clergy for Black lives, Jews for Black lives, right? We're all kind of tapping into the movement and into building this world that we wish to see. So as a rabbi, right, we think about spiritual leadership in terms of pastoral leadership, prophetic leadership, and priestly leadership. And I think that you've talked a bit about rituals and the way that ritual has kind of shaped the movement. I wondered if you could speak a little bit about your prophetic leadership, about your call for justice and what your approach is when you're, standing there and sharing the ways that the community is falling short and encouraging people to do better and be better?
That's a hard question. That's a deep question. I mean, I feel very blessed to be a part of an entire community that shares a vision for Black freedom, right? That shares a vision for something expansive. You know, a lot of people think that Black Lives Matter is just about protesting in the aftermath of a police killing. And we absolutely have to do that work. We absolutely have to protest. We absolutely have to call the names every single time. We absolutely have to demand justice in every single name. And we know that the conditions that are created that enable police, enable the state to steal our lives is much more expansive than just policing, right? So it's policing, but it's not just policing. So we are part of an abolitionist community that says that we absolutely have to upend unjust systems. So no tinkering around the edges of policing. Policing comes from slave catching. There is no reforming slave catching, as ridiculous as it would have been for Mama Harriet Tubman to say, you know, let's just make a kinder, gentler form of chattel slavery. That would have been ridiculous, right?
Right.
She said we have to abolish chattel slavery, right? Frederick Douglass said we have to abolish chattel slavery. David Walker said we have to abolish chattel slavery. We have to completely upend it. And we also have to get to freedom. And so freedom is the other side of it. So it's upending unjust systems and also trying to build a world of Black freedom. And what that means is building a world that's fit for the inheritance of my children, right? That where, you know, Amara gets to engage in her art and Tandiwe gets to have these loving and deep conversations about political philosophy all around the world. And, you know, Amen gets to do whatever it is 11-year-old boys do, right? But they get to be their whole and complete selves, their whole and complete selves. And so I'm blessed to be a part of a community that understands that. And we also know that, you know, we have to make sure that we radically imagine a world that's filled with art, that's filled with spirit, that's filled with healing justice, where people have all of what they need and most of what they want. And so I don't know if that's prophetic, but it is faithful, right? We are people of tremendous faith. We know that the structures under which we live are man-made structures, and somebody decided that they wanted this to protect their power. And we're saying that these systems, these institutions, these structures can be toppled, and we will topple them, and we will usher in something that works for all of us, not just a few.
Totally. And I think that the faith part also for me comes in with the idea that any diminishment of human dignity is an affront to God, to the creator, right? And like and any time that you are missing that mark, or also, you know, there's ideas, Jewish ideas called the Noahide laws that are not even the 10 commandments. They're like, okay, but even if you just honor these 7 commandments, these 7 Noahide laws, one of them is systems of justice, and you must have just systems. And because we know it's really the criminal injustice system, and there's so much injustice in the world, that's really where that prophetic drive comes for me, is just that idea that there's so much being trampled on that could be sacred and could be holy and could be expansive. And like you said, people can thrive. We have all that we need. It's just not being distributed in an equitable manner. And that's bad for all of us, and especially for the creator, right? Spiritually.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right.
I was going to ask you a bit about that third facet of spiritual leadership too, about the pastoral one, because, you know, as you mentioned earlier, you are there, you're right there on the scene when families get the news that their loved one has been involved in an officer involved shooting. So can you tell us a little bit about the way that you approach sacred witness and being with families and lifting up people in the movement people who are struggling with your strength.
You know, I'm very grateful. I take it as a tremendous honor to be in community with these families who are struggling for justice in the names of their loved ones. And I always say in the names of their loved ones, because really what these families are doing who are engaging in this work is the most giving thing you could possibly do, right? That these families know that John is not coming back. I know that, the family of Anthony Vargas, Anthony's not coming back. Dejan Kazee is not coming back. Fred Williams is not coming back. Waukesha Wilson isn't coming back. None of these folks are coming back. And so they're actually not struggling for justice in the names of their, for their loved ones directly. Who they're struggling for is my 3 children. Who they're struggling for is the people who are still here. What they're saying is that the beating death of John Horton inside Men's Central Jail, which left a flashlight imprint in his skull, which busted his ribs and liver and spleen and left bruises all over his body, which then they tried to pretend happened from a suicidal hanging, right? That we are not going to tolerate that for anybody. And part of getting justice in John's name means, rooting out the sheriff's gangs, right? Ending sheriff's gangs and ending the deputy gangs, at least 18 gangs within LA Sheriff's Department. It means tearing down Men's Central Jail. It means that Men's Central Jail should not be patrolled by those gangs, the 3,000 boys that stole John Horton's life, but also Men's Central Jail is by design a brutal and murderous place, right? It means saying that what do we do to ensure that people have all the resources that they need so that jail is not an option, right? How do we invest in community instead, right? And so the work of people like Helen Jones, the work of people like Lisa Hines and Sheila Hines Brim, and people like Netta, the partner of Dejan Kazee, and people like the entire Vargas family and the entire Twyman family who rolls deep, right, is really just, it's a blessing to witness and a blessing to struggle alongside them. So I feel very fortunate to know them. I know that it's an honor to engage with them. I know that it's an honor to be in struggle alongside them, and I'm deeply appreciative of their work. One of the things I think, especially now that we have to lift up as Black Lives Matter, is that we also know that our work is to do the really important job of transforming the world, to engaging in power building so that the power is taken away from those who do us harm and invested in the people. And I'm lifting that up to say that, the work that we do is struggling alongside families, is saying that, Kenneth Ross Jr. was murdered by Sergeant Michael Robbins in Gardena, California in his 4th shooting, right? And so we have to pass SB2, the Kenneth Ross Jr. Police Decertification Bill, so that no one else has to be subject to these murderous police, so that we can at least snatch their guns and badges instead of allowing them to, steal the lives of young Black fathers like Kenneth Ross Jr. and do so with absolutely no repercussions, right? And so that's the work that we engage in.
And that's why that's why you call it a radical movement, because you're getting at the root of the issue. It's not about putting a Band-Aid on this situation. Especially with SB2, we're trying to make sure that, people who have record of being involved in officer-involved shootings, that those officers have a review of what they've done, and they can't just quit one department, go to another without any review. In Judaism, we have this concept of the rodef, right? Someone who's pursuing someone else to harm them, usually kill them, right? And if we have an officer who has this track record of pursuing people and shooting them, as we did in the case of the officer who did end up pursuing and shooting and killing Kenneth Ross Jr., that's on us. Like, it's our responsibility to keep people who are pursuers off of the street and out of the context where they're able to kill people, right? That's a Jewish concept. You shouldn't stand idly by. You shouldn't, um, uh, turn a blind eye to what's happening. There's a case, Maimonides, 1,000 years ago, was talking about how both of those values are important, and also the third one, which is you should like slap their hand away. You have to act.
Right.
In American law, if you see someone pursuing someone to kill them, you don't have to do anything. You can't be brought up on charges that you didn't act. But in Jewish law, you will be brought up because it is your duty to stop the rodef, to stop the pursuer. So, so that's part of that sacred duty of engaging.
That's right.
In work. I think that the more that people understand that this work is primarily grief work and it's planting those seeds of hope, people will start understanding it in a way that that really values the sacred duty and honor that is being brought to the world. It's a selfless act to actually engage in Black Lives Matter and the work that you're leading. So I honor that.
Thank you. Yeah, I feel really blessed, and I do feel like it's a sacred duty and an honor to be involved in this work and to do this work with really, really great people. But I think that it's really beautiful and powerful if we think about ourselves as abolitionists. And I think about, like, most folks, when they think of abolitionism, they think of abolition from chattel slavery. And when we think about those abolitionist networks that were led by, and the bravery and the courage of formerly enslaved people, right? Of people who took their own freedom, right? Supported by folks who dared to risk their own safety and say, God has also called me. If we think about people like John Brown, right? And that we strive and aspire to build that kind of community, the kind of community that got Black folks to freedom.
Yeah, I had someone else on People Keeping It Sacred earlier, and he said, what we do today is planting the seeds for the next 500 years, right? So you thinking about it that way, what we do is of consequence here. And Jewishly too, we know that what we do has repercussions in the future. And this idea of us being in community, I think in Jewish communities too, there's a sense that we wouldn't be free if we were just acting alone, right? Even people who are family members of Holocaust survivors, they call out, they note righteous Gentiles, people who have stood up and saved lives. People who are survivors of the Holocaust also shared how they would not have been freed if it weren't for righteous Gentiles. There's a movie called Schindler's List about a righteous Gentile. There's monuments and markers at every Holocaust museum about the righteous Gentiles and about the role that people play, people who are not Jewish, who felt like they had a stake in the lives of Jews and what's happening. My own step grandmother, she was in Czechoslovakia. She was studying to be a lawyer, just like her father. And because of state-sponsored violence of the Nazi Germany, they took over and they deported her to Auschwitz. She ended up surviving. My own grandmother, she escaped Russia and the Ukraine because the Ukrainian army and the supreme commander of the Ukrainian army, that's his name, Supreme Commander Simon Petlura, and his officers, state-sponsored officers, came in, systemically slaughtered thousands of Jews, many of my own family members. I know my great-grandmother laid down with dead bodies on the sidewalk in the snow and pretended that she was dead, and that's the only way that she survived 100 years ago. And so that kind of trauma lives in my blood and in my bones, and that understanding that unchecked power, especially unchecked power from state-sponsored agents, is a challenge to righteousness. It's a challenge to human dignity, and it must be addressed. So I think that there's probably many, Jewish folks in the Black Lives Matter struggle. I don't know if, all of us are connecting the dots there between our own family's history. And also, I mean, there are also Black Jews who are also connecting to the Black Lives Matter movement out of personal connection as well. But that idea that there are traumas that we are all invested in, and to stand up with one another is an important step.
Absolutely. And, Jews for Black Lives is really has been a force and really important to our work in Black Lives Matter. And I think that the connection is a connection that's not just about solidarity, but also about connecting with what it means to oppose a violent state and how they're compelled to oppose a violent state. I remember a few of the actions we engaged in were actually around, the faith tradition of some of our elected leaders, right? So if you're really going to practice and say that you believe in this way, then how do you uplift and protect the lives of Black people? And that was really powerful. One of the things that we did was go to the mayor's house. So Mayor Eric Garcetti, who's now our outgoing mayor, right, is Jewish. And so how can you lead a city with a police force that is the deadliest in the entire country? How can you not actually make Black Lives Matter? Not just say it, but make Black Lives Matter. Jews for Black Lives has been really, really important in saying, this is not just a matter of standing outside and protesting. We have to say, when are you going to reconcile your actions with your stated faith? And so, we're really appreciative of all those Jewish comrades who recognize the hypocrisy between what the beliefs are, or the stated beliefs are, and what values. Those actions are. Right.
Yeah, the values.
Right.
I think that's so important to be able to recognize that actions have to back up values. Sometimes Jews will connect in with the Black Lives Matter movement because of our identity as Black Jews. Sometimes Jews connect in with the Black Lives Matter cause because of our values, our stated values, and our recognition that it's a righteous movement and that it's an affront to the Creator if we don't stop tear-dove. So,
right.
pursuers, and if we don't try to make the world a better place, that is our sacred duty, and that is, that's a mitzvah. It's not just like, good job, you did it. It's actually an obligation, right? That's why every time someone, I do some work with the Black Lives Matter movement, someone says, thank you very much. I'm like, please don't thank me. Like, this is my obligation, right? So people do that. People also connect in through shared trauma. And I wondered if you could speak just a bit about being a good ally, right? Because I think that I feel like I have found a way to hold my family's trauma and to hold the trauma that I've heard from members of the Black community, and not try to engage in an Olympics, the oppression Olympics, and not try to say, well, the Holocaust was worse, or the slavery was worse, or getting into that stuff, but actually just understanding that we're connecting on a human level, that trauma is something that must be stopped, and just keeping our eye on, like, let's just stop the trauma. Let's stop the trauma for anybody. We're not valuing it, but let's stop the trauma. Are there ways that you have found allyship to be particularly helpful? I know you shared earlier about, calling people out for, their lack of action aligning with their stated values, but also, are there other ways that have been really great examples that you'd like to lift up of allyship?
I'll give a couple of examples. So my last name is Abdullah. Most people know that Abdullah is a Muslim name. I'm also a Black woman, right? Makes me an easy target for allegations of anti-Semitism. Now, if anybody did any research, they'd also look and say, wait a minute, wasn't doesn't she have Jewish lineage as well? And I do, right? And the reason I don't talk about it very much is because people often want to exceptionalize Black people, right? And say, well, there's this, right? I think it's really, really important that Black people are Black people and that we don't say, there's this or there's that. I'm raising only, who my grandfather is because I think it's important, right? I think it's important to lift it up in the context of this conversation, right? So there have been many allegations about me and my daughter around anti-Semitism, right? Because we've chosen to say that when you talk about protecting people against state violence, that means protecting Palestinian people against state violence.
Mm-hmm.
And so my daughter, who was 14 years old at the time, read our plank on why we have to stand with Palestinian women, girls, and femmes. And she was immediately targeted and called an anti-Semite. Mm-hmm. And this is a 14-year-old girl, right? She was dragged, and it was Jewish folks who are involved in the struggle for justice who pushed back against that. And so who could say, because we've been in work together for a long time, who could say, it's not anti-Semitic to say that we want Palestinian lives to be protected, right? That's not anti-Semitic. In fact, if we're going to talk about what you just raised, that we must struggle for justice, everywhere, then it should be a Jewish value to also struggle for justice for Palestinian people, right?
There are many Jewish movements in Israel doing just that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So I feel very appreciative that I'm able to engage in courageous conversations with real allies and accomplices and friends in the Jewish community about what it means to be Muslim, about what it means to be a Black Muslim, about what it means to want to stand alongside the Palestinian people and say, we're not going to sit idly by, we're going to speak out. And why that is not anti-Semitic, and have those conversations and talk about those complications. So I'm grateful to be a part of folks who want to engage, who want to deepen understanding and want to build together so that we can build a world that really is one fit for the inheritance of our children and future generations. Right. It's love and camaraderie and allyship and really understanding the movement for people to say, Jewish comrades to say, not just what can I say, not just I'm still your friend, but what can I do, right?
And it's in complete line with your grandfather. He was an amazing activist in his own right? Like, that calling out of the threat to dignity, to human dignity then, and you calling out threat to human dignity in America and actually the world, right? With Black Lives Matter, and Thandiwe's calling out of threats to human dignity the way that she does. I think that it's completely consistent with the same value system and ethic, which is that any threat to dignity anywhere is an affront to you and to God, right? And that is actually just consistent. Black Jews get this as well, who when they start calling things out, I think that they get the assumptions made, the wrath of the Jewish community and or a sector of the Jewish community, I should say. And I think that you're right. It is something that we need to address and make room for. And that's also part of like being friends and being in a relationship and being able to call people in instead of calling people out, right? When Black Lives Matter and the movement, put out the values, the cornerstone, right? And then it had a line about, anti-Zionism, the idea of you called me. I didn't even call you. You called me, right? So we can kind of just like, where are we now? Like as people, and what does this do with movements and where are we? We need to like talk through some of this because, this is a lot bigger than ever anticipated. And, those kinds of relationships is really the kind of bind the movement together and hold the movement together. And that's why Black Lives Matter can become so big, the largest movement globally ever. And congratulations on the Nobel Peace Prize, nomination. I think that, that it's because of your authenticity and these relationships that you have created and that members of the leadership of Black Lives Matter, which is, I know that you diffuse it and say everybody is a leader in Black Lives Matter, but it's all being held together by these authentic relationships. And I'm grateful to be part of that.
Thank you. Yeah, we're grateful too. We're grateful too.
Thank you so much for sharing so much of your righteous spirit. And thank you to our audience for tuning in. If you have someone that you'd like to recommend that we host on the show, please contact us at keepingitsacred.com. There you can also sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date with all that we're programming, opportunities to gather together, and more. Thanks everyone for keeping it sacred. Be well.